In every relationship, both partners create a certain dynamic or cycle with each other, but there's many that don't work too well. And so the one that we're going to talk about today is the pursuer-distancer dynamic. And so this is one that many of us get into. You might have been there maybe once or plenty of times in the past, maybe didn't know it. But we're going to talk about this specific cycle, why we get into it, and how we're able to get out of that so that your relationship can have a healthy, productive cycle for the two of you. So what is the pursuer-distancer cycle? So this is exemplified by one person feeling unheard, unloved, not considered, and the other person feeling blamed, attacked, overwhelmed, hopeless. And so the cycle part of it is that the pursuer pursues the other person. And so maybe there's this much of distance between them. This person is saying like, hey, I feel unloved, I feel uncared for. And this person feels overwhelmed by the other person pursuing them. The other person feels hopeless, like there's nothing that I can do to be able to solve this situation. So instead what they do is they distance themselves. And then this person feels even more unloved, even less cared for, even less heard because this person backed away. And so what do? They pursue even more, which makes this person feel even more hopeless, even more overwhelmed. And so they just get into this cycle where both people are unintentionally creating this dynamic where they're getting exactly what they don't want from the other person based on their reaction to each other. So why do we end up here? It's kind of like what I just said, is that both of us are unintentionally creating this cycle with each other, that usually one person isn't the bad guy, that both of us are doing certain things that are bouncing off of each other and just going down this very vicious cycle. And so it can be looked at as the pursuer pursuing the other person, trying to talk to them about these things, but doing it in a way where maybe it is more attacking, maybe it is more blaming, which is understandable because they're so hurt. They feel so unheard. And so, of course, you're not going to be very vulnerable when you come to that conversation. But the tricky thing is what happens is that the distancer, they feel that. They feel the blame. They feel the attack. And so instead of being able to really listen and reciprocate some vulnerability, they shut down, or maybe they escalate and then withdraw, but there's some type of trying to escape the situation because it feels helpless, because you're just being met with, in their mind, this aggressor. But then what happens, the pursuer sees that, and it's proof that the other person doesn't care about them, instead of being able to look at it as, okay, they're just distancing because they're overwhelmed. I'm not saying that you should be expected to just understand these things when it's happening, but I think it's important to be able to note the experience of what it's like in the moment versus what might actually be happening. And again, the distancer feels the same way, that they're not looking at it as, man, the other person is really hurt, that's why they're coming to me. They're saying the other person, it seems like they hate me, like they're just coming and badgering at me, and so I'm just going to withdraw. I'm just not going to talk to them because I'm helpless. Like there's nothing that I could do to solve this situation. But then what both of you are doing is that you're unintentionally reacting to each other in ways that just triggers the other person even more. So it's really easy to get in this trap, because when we're really battling, when we're going at each other, it's a lot more difficult to have empathy or any type of understanding where the other person's coming from. And again, to emphasize, this is not intentional. We're not thinking to ourselves, I want to emotionally hurt the other person. It's usually us catering to our emotions, that if this is something that feels terrible, I'm not at a place where I can then, like I said, have empathy for the other person, have understanding, come to it with vulnerability. No, I'm coming to it like a bull in a china shop, that I'm coming to it much more aggressively, or I'm shutting down a lot faster because I'm paying attention to how I'm feeling. And those situations feel terrible for both people. And so again, it's not intentional, but there are still things that we're doing that are in our control to an extent. And so how to get out of this cycle? If you found yourself in this cycle, or you're trying to be proactive, how do you get out of this cycle? Well, you have to adopt a new cycle. And again, a lot easier said than done, but that's what needs to happen. You need to go from this cycle, you need to break it down, you need to disrupt it, and then eventually, slowly but surely, adopt a new cycle that actually works for you. And so the first part is identifying that you are in this cycle. Being able to identify like, okay, yeah, this is happening for the two of us right now. And that's important because usually we're caught up in, it's the other person's fault, the other person is the bad guy, instead of, okay, both of us are in this cycle that we both don't want to be in right now. Then figure out who the pursuer is and who the distancer is. This might be easy, might not. For some couples, one person is the primary pursuer and the other person is the primary distancer. But for other couples, they can kind of take turns with different themes, that in one theme, one person's the pursuer, but in another theme, the other person's a pursuer. So just to be able to find out in what themes, what role each person is. Then it's being able to think about, if you're the pursuer, what does the other person do that triggers these reactions that I have? Like, what do they do? What do they say that triggers this pursuing tendency? And same thing for the other person, the distancer, being able to think about what does the other person do or say that triggers my distancing? And then both of you trying to think about what would be helpful. What's something that the other person could do or say that maybe wouldn't trigger that, or would make me feel more comfortable or emotionally safe in these situations. And so it's kind of two ends of the spectrum, two sides of the same coin. What is that trigger? And is there anything that could be substituted for that would be an anti-trigger, that would make me feel more comfortable and more able to stay in the conversation in a more productive, vulnerable way? Then try to discuss this with each other in a genuine way. Try to genuinely ask each other what triggers them, and to be able to think about where this comes from. Again, for some couples, it comes from just the relationship they have. Like, there's nothing from their childhood that pops up for them. But for other couples, it absolutely comes from maybe how they were raised, different ways that their parents would be with them, different ways that they would handle conflict in their families growing up. So be able to really try to understand the context around why these triggers, why these roles happen. And now some longer term points that you can use to be able to keep yourself in a more productive cycle. Number one, communicate more often with each other. Don't let something small be pushed under the rug time and time again until it's something that's really big that blows up because it hasn't been addressed at all. Talk about these quote unquote smaller things that come up, because you'll be much more able to actually get through them. Like, if there's something that's been going on for 2 years and it's happened maybe 100 times, we're not going to be able to talk about that very easily, because it's been something that's been built up over 100 different times. And so the 101st time, I'm not reacting on it based on that one isolated incident. I'm reacting on it based on those 100 times, 101 times piled together. Whereas if something happened maybe 5 or 10 times, I'm not saying that that's going to be the easiest conversation ever, but it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to be able to actually talk through that instead of this big thing that's been built there. Another point is, don't spend time ruminating on how bad the other person is or how wrong the other person is. Spend much more time thinking about, what do I want to say and how do I want to say it so that the other person can actually hear me. And I think this is crucial, because it's not just what the other person did that's frustrating, that makes it hard to communicate. It's then what we do with that inside of our minds. That if we're ruminating on it and spending so much time on how bad or wrong the other person is, it's going to be much more difficult to actually have a conversation. But if I'm thinking to myself, okay, this thing frustrated me, what would I want to say to them? How would I want to bring that up to them? Then I'm going into it with a plan. I'm going into it with a well thought out, intentional expression that I want to be able to say to them, instead of just piling on them in my mind and then doing that in person, just kind of letting out all of these things that I'm frustrated on and then not getting a good response because they feel criticized, understandably. So again, try not to ruminate, try more to think about, what do I want to say and how do I want to say it? And then if you're bringing up a conversation, if you're initiating it, try to initiate it in a way that they can hear you. And so instead of going in and just saying whatever you want to say, however you want to say it, to think about, like, okay, there's a certain way that I can say things that they're more likely to hear me. That if I come in and I'm yelling and screaming at them, that's an extreme, but yeah, they're not going to hear me. That's something where probably no one is going to be able to really listen to you and say, okay, yeah, you made some good points there. I want to hear more. I mean, that's just not going to happen. But if you go to them and you say something like, hey, I just wanted to talk about something, this thing that happened earlier today. I've just been feeling kind of frustrated about it because of this and that, and I just wanted to talk about it with you. they're much more likely, hopefully, they're much more likely to respond well. They're much more likely to actually hear you out instead of just tune you out or escalate themselves. Now, if you're the other partner, try to ask questions, clarifying questions, not asking questions to further a debate where you're asking these leading questions to kind of pin them into a gotcha moment or something like that. Try not to do that at all. Try to ask clarifying questions. If there's something that you don't understand, ask them about that. Ask them, okay, you said this, but I didn't quite get it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And don't put your 2 cents in. Just try to clear the floor for them, make some space for them to be able to tell you their side of things, their experience of what happened. And another really important part is expressing understanding or validating them. So if they've told you how they feel about something, try to say like, okay, I can understand where you're coming from, or try to validate by saying something like, yeah, I mean, the way that you described it, I can absolutely understand why you would feel this way or that way. You saying those things is not agreeing with them. It's not saying that they are correct about what they're saying. It's saying that you can understand what they're saying, how they felt, their reaction. It's saying you get it. It's saying that I don't think that you're crazy for saying this or for feeling this way. Again, it's not you agreeing with that. You could still have some issues with maybe how they responded to something, but it's just validating them. It's saying like, hey, I'm trying to work with you and I can see where you're coming from. And then after that, try to take turns with each other. This isn't a one-sided conversation. It's not that the person initiating the conversation has their say and the other person just has to be quiet. Try to take turns with this. So the first person in the spotlight, let them have the spotlight for the first half of that conversation where the other person is just listening. But then after that, switch roles. Then the person who was first listening, now it's their time in the spotlight. And for the other person to then just be the listener so that both of you can leave that conversation feeling more understood and feeling like you really understand the other person a lot better than you did going into it. And then also try to learn how to repair with each other. So if there is a disconnect or if there is a rift, whether it's relatively minor or if it's pretty severe, try to learn how to repair with each other so that you can make sure that these little rifts or these bigger rifts don't go unattended, that you're actually working through those things and you're facing them head on instead of that happening and then just not talking for the rest of the day or not talking for a few days or a couple weeks, something like that. So try to be more active in that repair process. And so I hope this has helped. If you found yourself in the pursuer-distancer cycle, I hope that this video helps you to be able to identify that and hopefully take some steps to be able to get out of that with your partner. And I think that's crucial. I think having both of you on the same page that, yeah, this is happening to us and both of us want to work out of it, I think that's a really important part. But thank you for watching. If you know anyone who's in this type of place, feel free to send this on over. And if you want to watch more, feel free to click here for my most recent video, and I'll hopefully see everybody in the next video. Have a great day.